Now, when you hear the word Mughal harem, what comes to your mind? Secluded women, locked away, their lives dictated by men. But I'd say, think again. Because the reality is far more complex and thrilling. I mean, the women of the Mughal court were warriors, social brokers, intellects, musicians, sometimes women who would wear men's clothes on a daily basis. And the stories are insane. But we're never really taught about all of that. So that's why I'm here and I want to tell you guys all about the Mughal harem. Hi, my name is Misha and welcome to Tarihi Tales. And if you want to watch this video in Urdu, I have another channel called Tarihi Tales Urdu where you can watch the same video in Urdu. And if you like our channel and you want us to continue doing what we're doing, then please consider becoming a paid member on our Patreon. That would really help us out. Or become a paid member of this channel, or you can help us out by using the number on the screen. Other than that, you can like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff really helps us out as well. Thanks. Now, unlike the courts of the Ottomans and the Safavid courts, the Mughals actually inherited a very different legacy of what it meant to be a woman. And this legacy was brimming with women who were powerful and authoritative. And it's not by chance. This entire ideology of women being in power is actually very well rooted in the Timurid tradition. And because it's from the lineage of Timurlen, that the Mughals, the first Mughal Babur actually comes from, their traditions are the ones that were carried forward into the Indian subcontinent. Imagine this, that before the Mughals had set foot in India, centuries before, the women in Central Asia were anything but confined. They sat on public councils, they were regents, they had prominent roles in public ceremonies. They were masterminds behind these ceremonies that would go on within the royal palace, things like ceremonies and marriages. Babur himself, the first Mughal leader, actually also boasted that his mother alone commanded an army of 1,500 to 2,000 Mongol men. So women's roles were not just limited to domestic affairs, they were heavily intertwined with politics and military tactics. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The entire concept of a harem, or a separate space where only females live, never really existed during the Timurid times. And you don't have to take my word for it. A Castilian by the name of González de Cavillo actually visited Timur's court in the year 1404, and he documented what he saw, and he was quite shocked by what he saw because this was not common in Europe even at that time. He described women and even Timur's wives living in unwalled gardens near Samarkand. These weren't like secluded cells where these women would live. These were lavish pavilions with silk and tapestries hanging from them. They were indistinguishable from the pavilions of men. More importantly, these women were not just decorative, they actually heavily participated in political life. They hosted their own guests and mixed-gender feasts where alcohol flowed freely, and they wore veils so thin that you could easily see and make out the features of their face through them. And they were key players within the dynasty for organizing some of their most major events, far from the image that we get of a Muslim woman living under a Muslim ruler, right? A lot of that image is actually modern day construction. It wasn't really the concept even at that time, Now, all of this was actually carried by Babur when he came into India as well. And we're not just saying this, we actually have examples even after the Mughals came to India, like the example of Harem Begum, who was Humayun's cousin's wife. Now, Humayun was the second Mughal emperor, and Harem Begum was one of his cousin's wives. When Humayun faced defeat by his brother Kamran Mirza in 1549, he actually turned to this cousin's wife, Harem Begum, and asked her for help, and she delivered. She quickly armed thousands of men, deployed them herself, and even partly marched them towards the battle to help Humayun. And this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of their DNA. And it actually goes quite deep than just, oh, this is how the Timurids were. There was an entire reason as to why the females in a Timurid household had so much power. And it all goes down to bloodline. Because think about it. It was the women within the Timurid dynasty that actually carried Genghis Khan's blood. Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan, the conqueror that left thousands dead in his wake, but also conquered a large part of the world. That's who I'm talking about. And it was his bloodline that was being continued through these women. Because if you think of Timur was just a military leader. He wasn't really born into royalty. He had no legitimate claim to the throne. And to legitimize his control, what Timur did was he married into the Chingizi family, and that is how he established an in-law dynasty. So the power and the legitimacy for his rule actually came through the women in his household, because they're the ones that carried Genghis Khan's blood, not Timur. And this thing was really understood by the women as well, who kept their own identities even after marriage. They would keep their names and surnames and would have their own lineage established. And Timur kind of consolidated his control by marrying his sons also into the same bloodline. And this matrilineal connection actually is played throughout the Timurid dynasty, because the more closer you are to your matrilineal side, the more legitimacy you actually carry. It's actually the same thing, this bloodline and the legitimacy that Babur had, which saved him from ruin at the very end. So within the Timurid dynasty, and even then within the Mughals, women were kind of put into a position which would make or break a prince. If you want to get in power, you better look out for the women in your family, because that's where the power comes from. It's a very unique dynamic in the world, right? Now, even when you look at the example of Babur himself, who was the founder of the Mughal Empire, he also made sure to kind of rally the right woman to his side, and he would do marriages which kind of strengthened his bond. For example, Babur, who was a Sunni Muslim, married Maham Begum, who was a Shia, but was related to a powerful Timurid ruler, so that strengthened his position. He later married Bibi Mubaraka, an Afghan woman whose powerful connections helped him into managing the Afghan tribes. There's a legendary account where people say that Bibi Mubaraka actually asked Babur that, "Think that the whole Yusufzai tribe is enfolded in my skirt and pardon their offences for my sake." And Babur recognized her immense influence and responded, "I forgive the Yusufzai all of their offences in your presence and cast them into your skirt. Hereafter, I have no ill feelings towards the Yusufzai." This wasn't just a sweet gesture, it actually showed the amount of power that this woman wielded. And it wasn't like the power of these women only came because they married to Babur, because if you look at his first wife, Maham Begum, we can see her presence in Mughal accounts in later years, even after she's been divorced from Babur and she's living in the Mughal court, and she still has a lot of power. So their power is their own and not really stemming from marriage, as was the case in the rest of the world at that time. But as the Mughal Empire actually took root in India, things started to change. That Castilian we talked about, Cavalier, who feasted with Timur's wives and drank with them, well, such a thing became kind of unimaginable even during the time of Babur, because there's an account where a woman actually requests Babur to join his drinking party, and Babur is just like, "What? A woman wants to join our drinking party?" So you can tell that by this time traditions had changed and this wasn't really normal. Babur actually accepts the request because he's like, I'm just curious as to how this is going to turn out. So he accepts the request. And then he regrets it. This woman was called Hulhul Aneka, and Babur recounts that this experience was quite horrible because the woman actually drank a lot and got aggressive, and Babur had to actually pretend to be drunk to get rid of her. So the era of, casual mixed gender drinking was actually kind of over. Now, even though things were changing, it wasn't like the Mughal harems had become prisons. It was far from this. And we know of this because even in the Mughal courts, women wielded a lot of power. There are examples like Gulbadan Begum, who was the daughter of Babur, the sister of Humayun, and the person who ended up writing the Humayun Nama. She actually records different incidents which kind of show the power and the political influence that the women in the court had. She actually records a lot of different incidences from Babur's reign, but one that really stands out is the Mystic Feast in 1537. This was the marriage ceremony of Babur's son, Prince Hindal, to Sultanam Begum. And within this feast, Gulbadan actually lists 36 out of the 96 women of the extended royal family that were in attendance. And here's where the women dressed up as men bit comes in. Among these women, Gulbadan highlights two specific women, Shad Begum and Mehrangas Begum. She writes that they had a great friendship for one another and they used to wear men's clothes and were adorned by various accomplishments, such as the making of thumb rings and arrows, playing polo and shooting with the bow and arrow. They also played a great many musical instruments. I mean, can you just imagine that these are women doing everything men do during that time and thriving, and they earned respect for all of their accomplishments. Gulbadan talks about them as accomplishments, not as like, what the hell were they doing? No, she's quite impressed that, yeah, that's the way to live. Now, Babur's descendants, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, actually remained royal to the traditions of Babur. Women were invited into court politics. They went out with the men in mixed hunting parties. They were participating in military tactics and everything. One of the most quoted and the most famous example for this is the Empress Noor Jahan. It's said that she was actually one of the best hunters among all the men during her time. And hunting at that time wasn't just seen as like, oh, an activity. It was actually a great show of power. And there are accounts where the emperor himself talks about what an amazing hunter Noor Jahan is, And like the Timurids, women in the Mughal court actually could retain a lot of their own power on their own behalf. They did not need a man in order to be able to do so. Unmarried, childless, noble women were able to have a large amount of power and influence within the Mughal court. This is something that was very unique. This didn't even happen in the Ottoman courts. To be a woman of influence, you A, need to be married, and B, need to be the mother of a son. Now, in the Mughal court, you don't need to be married or have a son. There are examples like Jahan Ara Begum, Gulbadan Begum, Khanzada Begum, who didn't have to be mothers or wives, even though Khanzada was married. But, even after her marriage had ended, she had even more power and she was used as the highest counsel by these emperors. Jahan Ara, the Princess Jahan Ara's power, who was Shah Jahan's daughter, was so immense that when some Europeans visited the Mughals, they actually thought, well, how can a young childless, even a princess, have so much money and power? There must be something going on between her and her father, something unethical. That's actually what some Europeans said. And even though that was not true, it was just that they couldn't understand that how can this be, because this didn't happen in Europe. Childless, unmarried women had no power. So that was a very foreign concept to them. So foreign that having unethical relationships with their father was more acceptable in their minds. So these stories, which aren't really just stories, they're actual historical facts. All of this happened, these things took place. They paint such a different picture of what a Mughal harem must have looked like, where women could exercise their power and influence. They could be scholars, they could excel in the world, they could be businesswomen like Noor Jahan, Jahan Ara, so many other examples. I have other videos on this specific thing if you want to watch those. So I hope the next time you hear about Mughal harems or how even Muslim princesses lived in India before the British came, you understand that the propagandist reality that we're made to think of today, where it's secluded, no rights, no education, all of that is just propaganda made in this day and age. That wasn't the reality, right? That's why it's so important to talk about these narratives. So let me know if you like this video and what other historical narrative do you think needs a closer look. Give me some ideas down below in the comments and I'll look into those. If you like this video, consider becoming a Patreon. It'll really help us out, and we're adding new perks behind the scenes, including a one-on-one call for the highest tier subscription. So let me know what you guys think. I will see you guys next time. Bye.